Okay. All right, Kevin. My name's Christine, and I will be your host, just hanging out. I'm really just participating, let's be honest, because I get excited about all this. Kevin is your actual presenter for this session. He's going to share some great resources from the Constitution Center today, and there's never enough time to share all their resources. I'm going to be really honest. He's probably only going to dip his toes into all of the awesome things that they have going on over at the Constitution Center. So we will get to see a little bit of what he is doing. I'm going to pop the attendance link in the chat. My guess is we'll probably get a few more participants as we get going, because I think that there's been some cancellations. So we'll probably see some additional participants as we get going. But I think that's it. So Kevin, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. And good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to listen to me. And I'm excited to share some resources, introduce the institution that I work for, and to talk with you if there's any questions that you have about sharing resources or using resources when teaching the Constitution. So I'd love to hear sort of in the chat before we get started on what level you teach. Are we talking with primarily social studies teachers today, civics, government? I know last session we had some English teachers. What level would you teach and what subject you teach? Government teachers, excellent, thank you. Perfect. Okay, so yes, so hopefully these resources are helpful. Social studies, ELA, 8th grade, thank you so much. So that is essentially our goal. We have our mission statement that we'll go through, but if at the end of the day, our resources are able to make your lives just a little bit easier, that really is our goal. What the conversations that you have in your classroom are so important, and educating students about the Constitution, about our government, is essential. So if there's anything we can do to make your lives easier, of course, let us know, and hopefully the things that I'm going to share today will help. So let me go ahead and share my screen here and bring up our presentation. You'll see the Constitution Center in the background there. I know Christine's been there, not sure if anyone else has, but we're located right in historic Philadelphia. Some scholars have referred to it as the nation's most historic square mile. It's right across the street from the Liberty Bell, right across the street from Independence Hall. Of course, the site of the signing of both the Declaration and the Constitution. So today I want to sort of share some of the resources that we have at the center, some of the new ones. We just opened a new exhibit. We just developed last year an entirely new session of curriculum, 15 weeks of accredited curriculum for teaching the Constitution, and some of the free online programs, live programs that you can bring your students to free of charge. So sort of share all about the resources that we have and hopefully answer any questions. So about us, we were chartered by Congress in 1988, right after the bicentennial. Everyone's having conversations about the Constitution and people think this is a good thing. There should be a dedicated place close to Independence Hall where people can come and have discussions about the Constitution. And that's sort of our mission statement. First part, to be near Independence Hall, check. We opened our doors in 2003. But that second part, to disseminate information about the Constitution on a non-partisan basis, is one that we try to rigidly adhere to and make sure that we're following this mission by bringing together scholars from across the political spectrum and presenting the best arguments on all sides of what in many cases now can be very contentious issues, providing the best arguments, allowing people to have access to all of the resources and to be able to come to their own conclusion. We officially opened our doors July 4th, 2003. So eagle-eyed observers will note that that is a day more closely associated with the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution. We just like to further confuse people. But we celebrated our 20th birthday this summer. And getting ready for Constitution Day actually coming up, which we know is actually September 17th. So there's all sorts of in-person and online programming that we'll be doing for Constitution Day, which will be next week. And our educational framework that we've developed to sort of spearhead this mission of disseminating information begins with something that teachers are inherently experts at, and that is storytelling. The ability to use stories to either introduce a particular topic or to illustrate a point that you're already making can be so important. Teachers that I had growing up were incredible storytellers. And that's something that we see through history, even at the highest level. There's any number of stories of Abraham Lincoln being a phenomenal storyteller. When he was a young lawyer, he would routinely upset opposing counsel because he'd be in there telling stories and jokes, and the jury'd be laughing, the judge would be laughing, and he'd largely have sympathy already. And in 1858, when he's running against Stephen Douglas for the Illinois Senate seat, Douglas supposedly had this line here that nothing else, not his arguments or his replies to my questions disturbs me. But when he begins to tell a story, I feel I am to be overmatched. And if you saw the Lincoln movie with Daniel Day-Lewis recently, he's got a few scenes in there where he starts telling stories and people either leave the room or just, he always had an anecdote ready that would illustrate a point. And that's something that teachers are so good at, the ability to illustrate a story. And that is the basis of our educational framework. We begin with storytelling, and even for students for whom history is not necessarily their favorite subject, they can usually find a particular figure from history, a time period, a movement of some kind, some aspect of history or the government that they're interested in. And that's great. And then the next step is to take that interest and begin to make constitutional connections. How does what you're interested in relate to our Constitution? What are some areas of either constitutional amendments or constitutional debate? How do we look at your stories kind of the way that a constitutional lawyer or a judge might? And then we provide them sort of with tips for having civil dialogue, tips for asking constitutional questions. And once they sort of have this framework, then we're ready to have that discussion. So oftentimes we see from members of Congress on down, and discussions now can be emotional, they can be difficult, they can be nasty at times. So how do we make sure that the discussions that we are administering, that we're facilitating, come with best practices in a way that it is productive for everyone, and that no one feels overpowered, people feel that they have a voice and that their values are heard. So those are sort of our three steps. And throughout each of our sort of conversations that we have, we're encouraging people to ask to ask constitutional questions rather than political. So here is sort of the difference that we have. And you might have your own way of defining these. And in our case, for students, we might change simply one word. So we see here our political question is an issue of asking what the government or a government entity, agency should do. And of course, we all have our points of view about these. We all have our own personal beliefs about, I really feel that Congress should do this, or I do not feel that the president should do that. Those are certainly, there's a time and a place for those conversations, and it's important that we do have those conversations. But when sort of having programs sort of under the umbrella of the Constitution Center, what we try to do is take that word should out of it and play the part of the constitutional scholar, and not trying to ask what should be done, but rather looking at what the Constitution's text and laws say what may be done or what is allowed to be done under the Constitution. And that has a number of advantages. It opens up so many different avenues of discussion. So this is an example that we use, and we shared it in the last program. One of our more popular topics is the Fourth Amendment. So looking at these questions here, if you were to ask these questions in your class, perhaps you've asked something similar, how do you think your students might react? Let's say if we ask the first one, the political question, if you were to post your students next week, do you think that someone should come in and search your locker? How might your students respond to that? Probably not. I would imagine the responses would be relatively abrupt. They'd be exclamatory. No, certainly not. They might be one-word answers. And we presented this difference to a speech and debate class. And one of the students looked at the first question and said, well, it's just not a good way of having a discussion, because the responses that you're going to get are opinion, they're emotional, they're going to be brief, and students are going to take a position and not probably want to be talked down from it. Of course, no, I don't want my locker searched. But if you ask a constitutional question and the student continued to say that they were in a speech and debate class and that their grade was not on winning an argument, but it was on having the quality of a back and forth discussion. And that was not something that she thought could be achieved from asking the political question. So by posing the constitutional question, then you have so many different avenues for discussion. What does the Fourth Amendment say about this particular topic? Have there been previous Supreme Court cases or general court cases about rights in schools? What was the nature of the search? Was there probable cause? What was being searched for? There are so many different avenues for having this discussion. And for all of the different topics that we feature on our website, we do provide good constitutional questions. So ways to frame a discussion that try to steer clear of political leanings. So this way, people can come together, and even if it's a contentious topic, like we have the First and Second Amendments, civil liberties, these are things that people argue over, in all areas of society today. And when asking these questions, sometimes the conversations can get heated. So by trying to stick to constitutional questions, you can have someone who is over here politically and over here politically, and they're not going to agree on what should be done. But maybe by posing constitutional questions, they might agree that, yes, under the Constitution, the text says this, and, this is what can be done without having to come to a political consensus. So it's a way of having a much more fruitful discussion. And hopefully, because students are now playing the role of the lawyer who's analyzing a document and not defending their own points of view, it can take some of that emotion out of it. And some of that debate back and forth, where in a way that the conversation doesn't become personal. Someone says, yes, sometimes we shy away from topics that are controversial because we can see where they're leading, and we can see that, once it starts going a certain way and people maybe start engaging, with each other almost, and it becomes personal, then the ability to really have a fruitful discussion, it becomes that much harder. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I think anytime that you can do that, especially with teenagers, anytime you can make it not personal, it's really healthy for them, because they are so mired in the personal, because they're so worried about somebody saying something on social media or in the hallway, or what somebody's going to think about them later. They're so caught up in that world. They're so fearful of saying anything in class. So if you can take it out of that and keep it grounded in the documents and the artifacts, you're going to have a much more productive conversation. So I love keeping it in the constitutional question. It's so much better all around. And grading wise, like being able to put it in a grade book, and to be able to say to a parent or a principal, I based it on this, and I have artifacts to show that this is why I graded it this way, and I have documentation. I mean, overall, you're giving yourself, you're giving yourself so much, like, you're never going to have to go before a school board and defend yourself if you've grounded it in a constitutional question versus the personal question, right? Like you're not going to have to go, deal with a Florida issue kind of situation like that. So it is so much healthier to keep it in the constitutional situation like that. It really, really is. It's so smart. So smart.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christine. And yes, and great, for students too, and we've heard this before, that, reminding them that, or encouraging them that, I'm not agreeing with, or I'm not disagreeing with you personally. I might be disagreeing with either what your stance is, or if it's a primary source. That's such a great point, to using primary resources, using the Constitution. We're not necessarily disagreeing with each other. We're disagreeing with our interpretation on this document. It becomes less personal. So as we said, for each of these topics, and we're about to get into some of the the areas on our website with these resources that you can use, each of these topics, we've tried to provide constitutional questions, and we've worked with scholars across the spectrum to come up with good questions that hopefully ground our conversations in the Constitution. So now I'll take us on a tour of our website and some of the resources that we have. Does anyone have any questions about our framework, about sort of this guiding nonpartisan constitutional philosophy before we get started? Okay, great. So one great place to start, and we've tried very much to make our website easier to use, more user-friendly. So it just kind of got a facelift last year, and hopefully it seems initially to be much easier for people to use, which is what we're looking for. So when you visit our website, constitutioncenter.org, you're going to see these kind of initial heading under here. We'll spend a lot of our time in education, but we do have one tab that's the Constitution. And one feature that we have there is the interactive Constitution, which has been a process we've been working on it now and adding to it for, I think, 8 years now. And it really is sort of a great resource to start a conversation. If there's any area of the Constitution, from the preamble, articles, on down to the amendments, that you can use in your classroom when having a discussion. So the way that it works is with each of these topics, we would bring in scholars, and certainly before that even, we have the text, and it's annotated. So different areas, if you're looking at the 14th Amendment, and you want to look at the due process clause versus the equal protection clause, we have every aspect of the text annotated with history about why this clause was added, what this clause did, debates over this clause. So every little aspect of the Constitution text has been thoroughly analyzed, and you're welcome to pull from as much of that as you'd like. And then sort of as a summary within each of these articles or amendments, we'll have brought in scholars from various different backgrounds to write essays on these issues. And in many cases, they might strongly disagree. But then what we do is we lock them in a room together and ask them to write a common interpretation. So you're here, but what do you agree on about the First Amendment that the two of you could consent to having your name on in the same paper? So this offers a number of different ways that you could teach this particular issue. You can either give the individual essays and have the students kind of do a point counterpoint, and you can also use the common interpretation. Where were these people able to find common ground? And where might you be able to find common ground, as you're arguing these different points? So the interactive Constitution is sort of a great place to start, and any aspect of the Constitution has been thoroughly covered. It says, these are my favorite. I love sharing different viewpoints with my students. Love this. Yeah, absolutely. And this has been done for every topic. Very easy to find, and hopefully one that makes it's a great place to sort of start with the conversation. The other thing we try to make the professors do, and this was a bit more challenging, is remind them that we're trying to gear this towards students. So we have your normal level of speaking, bring it down a bit so that the rest of us can understand it. And a lot of them did a good job of that. Also on our website here, if you go to the education tab, and you can search there through classroom resources, either the library, which is more primary resources, which we'll get to in a moment, or classroom resources by topic. And this is a great resource with more sort of engaging resources to build on the interactive Constitution. So within if you were to click on the classroom resources by topic, we have a list. These are all of the topics so far that we cover. So if you're looking for a particular branch of the Constitution, you're really focusing on Congress or the Supreme Court this week, you can look there. Many of the amendments that you're covering, constitutional topics ranging from Civil War and Reconstruction to the Electoral College, principles of the Revolution. Within each of these different topics, there are previously recorded exchanges, scholar exchanges, which I'll talk more about in a moment, briefing documents that our scholars have worked at, worksheets, anything that you might want, and links also to blog posts, educational videos, town halls, all the information that you could possibly want about each of these resources, about each of these topics are there, and we've tried to organize it so it's easy to find on the website. So between those two, so the classroom resources by topic and the interactive constitution, those are fixed. They're there. You can always pull from them whenever you need. In the next section, I will share some more kind of interactive and engaging live areas you can use our website. But before we do so, does anyone have any questions about any of the resources that we've shared so far, either the interactive constitution or the classroom resources by topic? Okay, great. So we have sort of 3 areas, actually 4. There's a brand new initiative that we're going to be sharing that we hope will be really good for younger students as well. But these are online resources where you can engage live with an educator or a constitutional scholar, and your students can ask questions as we go through. So the first one, which is maybe the least engaging, not as live, but a great new resource, is Constitution 101. And this is a brand new 15-week accredited curriculum for teaching the Constitution. Again, we brought in scholars, asked them to pick the best primary resources, asked them to cite the best cases, prepared worksheets, even quizzos, tests are in here. And it's 15 weeks of curriculum for teaching the Constitution. And the great thing is you can pull from as much of this or as little of this as you'd like. So if you really wanted to go all in, here's sort of our week by week breakdown. If you wanted to use maybe just the worksheets for every week, you could do that. If you wanted to focus on using this to teach the Supreme Court, but you're confident in your ability to teach the presidency, that's great. You can pull the resources from the judicial week, but you don't have to touch them on some other weeks. So all of this is there on the website for you to pull from as much of or as little of it as you like. And this was sort of a team effort put together, and I will, and I said on the last session, it's always dangerous when I try to use technology to share videos. But we have our president and CEO, Jeffrey Rosen, who did kind of an introduction to this class. So about a 3-minute video, but I want to go ahead and share this to kind of put his voice on it. So let me see where. Okay, that's there. Now, if I go to, why is it not? One moment, apologize for the delay here. Okay, here we go. Just give me a thumbs up. Hopefully you can hear the sound on this. Let me know if you can hear.
Hello, friends. I'm Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center, and I'm thrilled to introduce our new Constitution 101 course and our Founders Library of Historic Documents. This is our core curriculum, an introduction to everything you need to know about the Constitution. From the founding era to the Civil Rights Movement, it includes videos and primary texts selected by America's leading historians and law professors of all perspectives, 150 historic documents, and 50 landmark Supreme Court cases. It was an honor to work with my wonderful colleagues at the National Constitution Center in putting the Constitution 101 course together, and I can't wait to share it with you. Here's to all the light and learning we'll share together. In this course, we'll be nonpartisan, and we'll learn how to separate our political from our constitutional views. In other words, we'll ask not what we think the government should do, but what the Constitution allows or forbids it to do. And when you find yourself reaching constitutional conclusions that differ from your political preferences, you know that you're thinking like a judge or a constitutional lawyer. You're also educating yourself to exercise your important rights as well as responsibilities as a citizen and student of the U.S. Constitution. We'll begin the course with an overview of the text of the Constitution and the leading methodologies that judges use to interpret it. We'll explore the founding era, the Constitutional Convention, the ratification debates, the creation of the Bill of Rights. We'll look at key parts of the Constitution, including separation of powers, federalism, slavery in America, free speech, digital privacy, the battle for equality, and the story of voting rights in America. We'll also look at the arguments in landmark Supreme Court cases, both in the majority opinions and the dissents. And I always want you to read both the majority opinion and the dissent so you can make up your own mind. We'll learn how to analyze the arguments on all sides of constitutional questions. And we'll learn how to disagree without being disagreeable, practicing the habits of civil dialogue and respectful debate on which the future of the American experiment depends. Let's approach our learning together in a spirit of humility, recognizing that we have a right and a responsibility to listen respectfully to people who may disagree with us before making up our own minds. As Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said, the Constitution is made for people of fundamentally differing points of view.
Okay. So that is our Constitution 101 curriculum. And if anyone has any questions about that, and certainly just from that video alone, there's a lot of information there. But again, it's not something necessarily that you have to fully commit to. You can look at it, you can explore it, and you can find what areas of this curriculum best work for you, what areas could you use some help, support in teaching, and where does this curriculum best match up with what you're teaching in the classroom already. So if you have any questions about this curriculum, navigating it, it does rely very heavily on primary resources too. And that's another thing that can be helpful, along with teaching, and asking constitutional questions. It's a nice way of sort of finding common ground and avoiding any of the seemingly increasing pitfalls today where people are asking, why is this particular resource in the classroom being taught? Why are we using this? Why is this story being told? I'm not sure how many of us have experienced that in the classroom recently, but because we have this sort of, accredited backing of these scholars from all sides, we said, no, this was agreed upon. I didn't pick this resource. This was picked by scholars working with the Constitution Center. And again, using primary resources, it provides common ground for students who might not agree necessarily, but they can at least be reading the same text, looking at the same document, and agreeing that this is what the document says. So that's Con 101. I'll move now. If anyone has any questions about Constitution 101, please let me know. But that's available on the website. Should be relatively free to find, or easy to find. Everything in here is free. The next program I'm excited to talk about because, go ahead.
All right. No, I do have one question. So I might have missed this. I'm sorry. My daughter was texting me. I apologize.
No worries.
The Constitution 101, is that really meant more for students to watch, or is it more for teachers to watch? I feel like I didn't totally get that part. So
we have it on the website. It's sort of divided where it's curriculum where the teachers, this is where you can grab your resources, and then it's sort of for students. So it's sort of divided that way. Yeah. So
that's what I wasn't it felt like there was pieces for both, so that makes sense. Okay, so there's stuff for teachers to get the background and info that they need for teaching, and then there's pieces that they can show for students.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yep,
that's
absolutely.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Very cool.
Yeah, and we tried to sort of pair it where it's easy to sort of sync to Blackboard or Canvas or whatever your sort of online learning module is.
I love that.
And it's grouped by worksheet, tests, lesson plans, vocabulary words, activities. So it should be fairly easy to work through. But we do have, of course, if there are any questions that you have, and throughout the school year, we do have a series of kind of professional development sessions where our team comes in and teachers just ask, I've been using the curriculum. This has really worked well. I have a question about how this works. How do I find this? And we'll sort of do an ongoing professional development on how to use this new tool.
That's fantastic. I love that. Thank you so much for clarifying.
Of course. So this next program here is one that I'm personally involved in, and one that has really been a unique learning opportunity for everybody involved for the last few years. The Scholar Exchange Program was when we started kind of the current form that it's in kind of took place right when COVID started, and we would have our CEO on with an expert, a guest. It might be Ken Burns, it might be a Supreme Court justice, but those classes would be once a week, and it wouldn't necessarily work best for teachers' schedules. So this version now is sort of more intimate in the sense that it's one classroom that can come to a particular time period, and it's teacher-driven in the sense that in the last 2 years, we've built up a roster of partnering scholars, lawyers, historians, judges who work with us, and teachers tell us what date, what time, what topic, what works best for you, and then we take it from there. You tell us, on December 15th, I want to bring my middle school or high school class to talk about the Bill of Rights. And then we have different levels for middle, high school. Occasionally, sometimes we'll even get upper elementary or college level. We'll book the scholar. We'll send you the Zoom link. We'll send you the prep materials. We have a PowerPoint that goes with it. And then a member of the education team will moderate the discussion. So if you're teaching about the Fourth Amendment, we'll bring in a magistrate judge who primarily deals with unsealing search warrants. If you want to learn about the principles of the American Revolution, we have a very enthusiastic historian who lives 5 minutes from Concord Bridge in Massachusetts. So we're able to sort of give you an opportunity where your students can talk to another voice, talk to a scholar. And because it's a Zoom format and not kind of the webinar style that the public classes were, students can ask questions in real time. They can stop and, Your Honor, can I ask a question about something you just said? And we had a sort of a great story last year where a student answered a question and then told her teacher afterward, I feel like I can go to college now because I was able to answer the judge's question. And the scholars are routinely impressed by the teachers and the level of intelligence that the students bring to these discussions. For a lot of the scholars who are actively practicing lawyers, sitting judges, many of them, it's a nice kind of break for their day where they get to talk to students. A lot of them will say it's kind of the best part of their day. And it's just a really unique learning opportunity for everyone involved. And it's entirely free to teachers, and it's teacher driven. And we have enough participating scholars now where we're able to usually say yes to pretty much every request. If you have 4 or 5 different class periods throughout the day and you want to bring each of them to their own scholar exchange, we can usually accommodate that. You tell us what times, and then we can set up the 5 individual sessions and bring each one of your class. And we've done that and are doing that this week. I think next Friday, there's a middle school class that's coming to 5 individual sessions. So it's teacher driven. You tell us what works best for you, and we try to build that learning opportunity around you. And you tell us what level you're at, if there's a particular Supreme Court case that you'd like to discuss, wherever we can best kind of bring this extra voice to fit your curriculum and what you're already teaching, you let us know. So that's the Scholar Exchange program. You can sign up for that on the website too. There's a tab under education for live learning opportunities. We also, of course, make use of the physical museum. In the last few years, we've, of course, tried to place an emphasis on virtual programs and learning opportunities, but we still do have this wonderful physical space. And now kind of with the technology, you're able to visit our new exhibits, visit the exhibits that we already have without having to actually be in the physical space. So we have a number of exhibits within the museum that we offer tours. And for teachers, these tours are free. You tell us which exhibit you'd like to go through, and it's a 45-minute session. I should have said the Scholar Exchanges are 45 minutes as well. Most of these programs are all 45-minute sessions. And someone on the education team will take your class through a tour. There are 4 exhibits, and one of which is brand new, I'm pleased to share. Classic one, if you've been to the center before, you'll remember the Signers Hall room, 42 life-size bronze statues of the men who were present for the signing of the Constitution. Students can get an up-close conversation with George Washington, Ben Franklin, everyone's favorite Broadway star, Alexander Hamilton. And we'll take you through the debates and the discussions of the founding of the Constitution. We also have 2 on our new kind of first floor, Civil War and Reconstruction, the nation's second founding, covering the stories before, during, and after the Civil War, with a particular emphasis, of course, on the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and how these collectively served to sort of create this nation's second founding. Sort of in connection with that, sort of right next to it, we leave off this story with the 15th Amendment and the question of who could vote. And that goes nicely into the 19th Amendment, which the opening was delayed a little bit because of COVID, but we're actually able to open it on August 26th of 2020, which was the exact 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And this exhibit chronicles the history of the women's suffrage movement. And then our newest exhibit, if you've been to the center before, and there's sort of a broad timeline of history, and that exhibit is getting a refresh, and instead is going to be sort of 5 separate exhibits about various constitutional topics. And just last week, our newest exhibit, the First Amendment, opened. And this covers all aspects of the 5 or 6, depending on how you're counting, freedoms of expression that we find in the First Amendment. And this comes, of course, with lots of interactive activities, which will be up shortly on the website, where you're able to engage and teach about the First Amendment to your students. So those are all available to do a tour on, free on the website. You let us know what time works best for you and we can schedule. And also, this is a brand new feature for this year, civic stories. And these are engaging programs geared more toward middle school, elementary school, than some of the tours and the exchanges, but also necessarily good for any ages. And these are going to be happening at scheduled times throughout the year, where you can tune in. They'll all be recorded so you can watch later. But we will spotlight a number of key individuals from history that somehow impacted our either understanding of the Constitution, challenged the constitutionality of something, and we spotlight people who might not necessarily get the same front facing, get the same exposure in a normal tour of Signers Hall or a normal exchange. So we try to spotlight a number of figures that really are part of the story of We the People. So this is a brand new program that's going to be going this year, and there'll be several offered every month. So between all of those, we try to offer lots of different topics, lots of different offerings for students of all ages. And as we said, they're free for teachers. So before we move on to our next section, does anyone have any questions about any of the resources that we have on the website? Is there anyone that you have a question about, anything that you think might work best for your class, or any that you think might be something that you'd be interested in trying? Okay, great. Yes, absolutely. And we have found that the demand for virtual programs, it's been nice to see that has continued and even grown since the height of COVID. Even though the museum is now open and we're still bringing in school groups at the level that we did before the start of the pandemic, all of this experience and learning how to do virtual programs, and for some of us, myself included, it was more learning than others, learning how to do all of the tech. But now we have this availability to reach students in different states who might not be able to come and physically visit the center. So we have all these options and we want to continue to offer them virtually. So they're all there and they're all free to use. And even for people who teach online.
Yeah, I have a question about timing. So, obviously we're on the West Coast. So how does that work? Say a class doesn't get out until 3:30. You're looking at, 6:30 for the museum. Does that work for timing for a virtual tour? Like, can you guys still do that for one of your virtual exhibits? Does that timing still work for you guys for a class to still do that late?
So for the virtual tours, there is some limitation. The museum is usually open until 5 o'clock Eastern.
Okay.
There are some options though, depending on the nature of the tour or what the group wants, where we have done that in the past. It's not necessarily regularly offered, but for like after hours groups, we have done that in the past. So if there's a group that really wants to do a particular tour at a late time that it's just not quite able to work, we can usually find a way to accommodate.
Okay.
The scholar exchange program, there's much more flexibility there because it's not tied to the exhibit, and we have scholars on the West Coast too, so it's not going to be too late. So for a school on the West Coast who is looking to do, let's say, a scholar exchange at 4 o'clock Pacific time, we'll book one of our scholars on the West Coast, and then it's
got it
for everyone.
Yeah, because that's what that was the other thing I was thinking is like, say there's a school that goes until 3 or 3:30 and they need to do 5 different sessions. I'm thinking, how would they do that if somebody's on the East Coast time? So that's really good to know that there would be some flexibility with that. Yeah, that would be great. I really like that. Yeah,
absolutely. So like, yeah, in that case, and we have that next week where there's a class on the West Coast, and they've got 5 sessions, the last of which I think gets done at 3:40 or 4:40 Pacific time. So that we have West Coast scholars, and then if I'm the moderator for that day, then it's just, if those are the dates of the programs, I just adjust my hours and work to kind of sync up with them.
Yeah, and I mean, for example, as I mentioned, I run the We the People program, and we often have classes that meet at night, and they always have coaches come in. And so obviously we wouldn't ask a scholar to come in at like 10 o'clock at night, but I'm just thinking like a guest speaker to come in for an after school club or something, to do like a 4 o'clock. So that would be 7 o'clock East Coast potentially. I'm thinking like some teachers have like a civics club or like a Rotary club or, a special club. They would want a guest speaker. I'm thinking that would be so cool, the leadership group or something, to have a speaker come in. That would be 7 o'clock. So those are some things I was thinking of. There's so many options. So it's really good to know there's some flexibility with that.
Absolutely. And worst case scenario, if everyone is just not able to find a time that works for everybody, we do on occasion record tours of the exhibits, and they are posted on our YouTube channel. We try to will update like the best ones get on, not everyone necessarily, but if you're looking to see Steiner's Hall tour, we do have like the most recent really well executed tour that'll be on their website. So there is the option always to watch a tour of the exhibit spaces.
Yeah, that's great. Good to know. Okay, super cool. Okay, we'll let you keep going. Thanks.
Okay, great. So in just sort of this last section here, we offer all of these areas of sort of constitutional resources. And once we've sort of done that, that's sort of the second part of our educational framework. And then the last bit is just, how do we then take these resources and have a discussion? How do we have a civil dialogue, one there everybody feels that they have a voice, and everybody feels that their point is being heard, and we're able to engage and talk about these different constitutional topics and contentious topics in a way where nobody feels that they're not able to engage. We want people to engage. And someone said earlier that I'll often maybe not present these difficult questions because I'm worried that it will turn into a sort of personal battle. So one of the ways that we sort of get students set up for success is by sort of establishing norms, and we talked about this in the last class for teachers. And I'd love to hear, sort of from you, have you established any norms, or do you have sort of rules in your classroom for when your students are going to engage? What expectations do you have, or what expectations have your students had in the past? And this is sort of a wonderful activity. There's sort of 4 different definitions here of civil dialogue. And we look at these and maybe take like a minute or so, and we can use these as a kind of a model. Are there any of these 4 definitions that really kind of strikes a chord with you, that this really encapsulates what kind of conversation you're looking to have in your classroom, or sort of in your own words? What are sort of some rules or some standards that you want to have when you're having a discussion with your students? And so we take a moment, think about those. And if there is one of these that particularly resonates with you, put in the chat, 1 through 4. We have found in the past that teachers sometimes are reluctant to put 3 down. And I wonder if that's because the source is Wikipedia. I painted 2. Absolutely. So yes, this idea of an exercise in patience, integrity, humility, and mutual respect, even for those with whom you disagree. And that's such a great point too. This whole exercise is built around having conversations with people who you don't agree with, If everybody always agreed, then we wouldn't even need to be here at all. It's how to have conversations with people that have different points of view, and sometimes strongly different points of view. So 2 and 4 as well, the significance of 4, claiming and caring for one's identity, needs, and beliefs without degrading someone else in the process. And we sort of talked about that earlier, this idea of disagreeing with a point of view, maybe not trying to make it personal, and trying to ground the conversations and the disagreements over the Constitution. Another activity that we found that even kind of sets students up for success before you even establish norms is to almost have them do their own report card. Think about when you've been in an argument before. What's that been like? How have you behaved? Quite oftentimes we can certainly recall how the other person acted. This person got really upset. This person insulted me. This person didn't listen to me. How often do we take time to think about how we acted in the heat of the moment? And this can be a great way for students to even begin to think about, well, maybe I could do a better job of listening. Maybe I need to take some time and think about how I react when people disagree. Do I handle it well? Do I need to maybe take a step back, take a breath? Making students aware consciously of how they react in an argument, that can often be helpful. So are there any of these norms up here that you think maybe either struck a chord with you personally in your own reflection, or maybe that you think if you were to pose one of these or all of them as a group, do you think sort of giving your students the opportunity to grade themselves might have a positive impact in your classroom? Some of these, when we'll bring in, students who will come in, to the Constitution Center and visit, we'll usually begin with this. How do you behave in a conversation? And a lot of times it can help. It's like, oh, now that I think about it, I can get heated. I can get emotional, and I'll try to do a better job of that. And one of the best examples of sort of how to have civil dialogue, how to have conversations, took place a few years ago. Now retired Chief Justice Stephen Breyer, now retired Associate Justice Stephen Breyer, visited the Constitution Center and was asked a question by a student. Do you and the other justices ever get into fights, get into arguments when discussing difficult constitutional questions? And he said, yes, absolutely. And then he outlines, and I'll share the video in a moment, kind of 4 minutes of just really sound advice for how to have civil dialogue. And it's an important point to remind students that if you're disagreeing with someone about the Constitution, about a particular political issue, that is the norm. We've been disagreeing about the Constitution ever since there was a Constitution. And people at the highest level of government thought, justices of the court, presidents, members of Congress, they disagree more often than not. So if they can't come to a consensus, then it's normal for us to have different points of view. So your disagreement with your classmates, that is okay. And in many cases, in dealing with the Constitution, that's preferred almost, to have different points of view, the marketplace of ideas. But it's how we go about having those disagreements. How do we disagree? And how do we act when talking with someone who has a different point of view? So in my last, go ahead.
Sorry, Shauna had unmuted herself, so I didn't know.
Oh, go ahead, Shauna. I'm sorry.
So question for you, because I do teach online. I teach in our online high school. So that has been a new experience for me after, 22 years of teaching. Now I'm suddenly in the online world and trying to teach my students how to have this type of, first of all, it's okay to disagree. That's a hard thing for me to get them to understand. And then how to do it, because we've talked a lot about how people have become keyboard warriors. And that's an issue in the online learning, as well as the kids almost kind of react in our group chats like they do on social media. So do you guys talk about that when you guys are talking about it's okay to disagree? And do you because that's the one area that I keep constantly going over, but I'm thinking, wow, if I could have somebody else maybe say something that maybe it's not the tutor saying it, it's somebody else or an expert talking about it in the field about how to agree to disagree well in an online format.
Sure, absolutely. And that is a relatively new challenge. And it's not one that, I mean, we've certainly dealt with that, like during a tour or exchange or so, where students are in the chat and it can be, more abrupt answers or getting off topic. And maybe that is something that we could do a video, devoted specifically to that. But I think, and we've tried to reinforce this, that it's largely, we want the same kind of standards to apply about a conversation. We don't want to be cutting people off, interrupting people, whether that's through the chat or online. And maybe also, taking time to, have more deliberate answers. It's so easy to, get into texting language and, very abrupt points of view. But taking time to, thoroughly type out your response and to think about it. One thing that we have done this year with the exchange program that we have found to be helpful is, like throughout one of the sessions, we'll have sort of question prompts, for the students to, on the PowerPoint, they'll get a question. So if it's First Amendment freedom of speech, question is, how would you define freedom of speech, what it means to you? And in the past, we would, students would come in and, it would be the first time that they're seeing this question. And what we've done this year is any questions, any discussion prompts that we are going to be using during this virtual learning experience, we share those questions ahead of time and give the students an opportunity to think thoughtfully, reflect on them, even prepare their answers if they want. And then, they can cut and paste in the chat. Because that way we found they have time to think more thoughtfully and more thoroughly about what is being asked. They can prepare their answer ahead of time, and it was more valuable, we thought, to give them time and to give them the question ahead of time than to have them try to think on their feet. And that time when you ask a question and they're thinking about it and then they have to type it, giving them the question ahead of time sort of counteracts maybe the quick and reflexive nature that comes with online learning. Of course, that doesn't necessarily work for every circumstance, but we found in that particular learning experience, giving them, if they don't have the time to maybe process it in real time on an online setting, giving them as much information ahead of time can help with the discussion.
Okay.
But that it is a great point, and one certainly that we need to continue to develop as these relatively new ways of teaching take place. So thank you for your question, and we'll continue to kind of develop our institutional answer to that. But
it was just a thought, like we're getting into this, and even when I bring up, we're talking Constitution, we're not talking how you feel. We're talking, this is the constitutional issue that we're discussing. Is still a lot of, because of the medium of social media and how they are so embroiled and embedded in that thought process. And then when you're in an online classroom, they kind of, it's a computer, it's digital, and it's almost like it flips that switch in their brain where they're just automatically bringing that in with them. So it was just a thought of, I say it, and sometimes, kids just kind of look at us teachers like, oh, whatever, maybe if an expert said it in this maybe a different way. Hey, we're going to use some stuff. We're going to do some stuff through the National, Constitutional Center. Let me show you what they talk about in regards to civil dialogue in the online classroom. Or
yeah, Shauna, I think that the video, I know we aren't going to have a ton of time to watch the entire thing, but I think that the video that Kevin was going to show on the justices and what they were what their conversation was. So I don't know if Kevin, you want to just share the link to it.
Yeah, that's
I think it's really, really helpful. I mean, it's Supreme Court justices saying, like, we don't scream at each other. We don't yell at each other. We listen to each other, and we appreciate what each other has to say. And I think that even just like hearing that that Supreme Court justices don't agree, but they still have to listen to each other. I think even just hearing that from people, knowing that they don't agree with each other, like, so I think even just showing those kinds of videos would be helpful for them. So finding that kind of stuff, because all we see right now is the media showing that Congress doesn't get along, and you know, we see these debates on TV, and we see what the media tries to show as constant non-examples of discourse. But the reality is the majority of adults have to use civil discourse, right?
Yeah.
And so, but the media is going to go for clickbait. And so they're going to constantly try to make sure that you're tuning in. And so they're not going to show examples of discourse. So it's our job to find examples of discourse. And this is a great video. So definitely watch this. Obviously we didn't have time, but this was a great opportunity for us to chat about it. So I love that we had a chance to talk instead of watch this, but this was Stephen Breyer I loved what he had to say in this video. So I think it's really important to use it.
Yeah. I hadn't seen this one. I always show my kids Scalia and Ginsburg, who were best friends and so polar opposite on the political spectrum, and how they talk about how they used to have discussions.
Yeah.
And I would show my kids that, but this is, you know.
Yeah. And then the resource that Kevin showed before, which are the two opposing viewpoints, which are the essays. Those are great because they're the opposing viewpoints, but then they also have some essays that they're kind of like there's some combinations of where they kind of show how to pull it together. Those are great resources too. So definitely check out that piece. Now, that's obviously not video, but it's great. It's great to show how you can pull together some commonality, and you can really see how two opposing viewpoints can actually pull together for one common opinion, and how that can be, you know, something that can make sense together. So that's really important as well. That's something that I use with students a lot. There's a ton of resources on the Constitution Center website for that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've used some, but now that I've seen more that Kevin has shown us, like I'm absolutely ecstatic. Like I'm so excited about this.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let me before I let you guys go to lunch, hold on. I gotta give you the survey. Okay, that's the survey for this session, because we got to make sure you do that, because we got to make sure you guys get your credit for today. And now it's lunchtime. So I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you so much, Kevin. You gave us